Hello everybody, it's George from Ireland. Well, thank you for going back to my channel. This video is about the Oreshnik missile that Russia's been bragging about so much lately. This missile system, which they've used in Ukraine, and they announced with a great fanfare, have been deployed to Belarus. Now, why on earth would they tell us that? Obviously, most of these things are military secrets. Disclosing that carries a sentence of several years in prison. They're telling us for reasons of public relations, psychological warfare. It's meant to be intimidatory. It's not because they just very nicely like to keep the public clued up as to what is actually going on. So, it's part of the Russian strategic missile forces. On the 6th of December, Putin was with the Supreme State Council of the Russia-Belarus Union State, and that met in Minsk. Remember, in 1999, President Lukashenko signed with Boris Yeltsin, the then president of the Russian Federation, an agreement that Belarus and Russia would eventually be fully reunited. Here we are, a quarter of a century on, and it still hasn't happened. And the run up to this Ukraine war, Putin was increasingly frustrated. The obvious thing is he could easily invade Belarus and seize that. He already had forces stationed there. They outnumber Belarus 14-1 rather than sort of 3.5 to 1 as they did with the Ukraine. Belarus has got no other allies. Nobody would come to their aid. Lukashenko's dictatorship is so vile, it's even worse than Putin's and. Already quite economically dependent on Russia, but they went for the harder target rather than the softer target. Although, if they had successfully subjugated the Ukrainians, the next one on the hit list would have been Ukraine. And that even came out on the second day of the war, this press release from the Russian government saying, that's it, we've done it. We've fully reunited Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. And Lukashenko, he doesn't want to be fully reunited with Russia, getting as much aid as he can without actually having to be totally absorbed into Russia, and so on. As the Oreshnik missile is intended to scare the Ukrainians. They used it on the 21st of November against Dnipro, and yes, it hit, and yes, it killed people, but it's nothing like as devastating as Russia would have us believe. So why are they doing this? It was partly because they felt they had to riposte to the new US and British policy, allowing ATACMS to be used in the Russian Federation. Up until then, the United States would only authorized the ATACMS missiles to be used inside Ukraine proper, some of which is illegally occupied by Russia. Ukraine was not allowed to fire over the border into the Russian Federation. The Ukrainians were deeply frustrated about this, saying the Russians are massing there. We can see where their command posts are, where their ammunition depots are. We've got to be able to use it there, and we will destroy a lot of their assets, kill a lot of their troops, and make their logistics much, much trickier for them. And indeed, that's happened since Biden authorized that. That slowed the pace of the Russian advance. Obviously, hasn't stopped it. If the United States had taken this decision 3 years ago, the war might be in a very different place. Likewise, as Storm Shadow missiles, the British call them, Scalp, as the French call them. It's a Franco-British project to develop them. Now they can be used in the Russian Federation as well. And this is escalatory. Moscow says everything is escalatory. But what have they got left to do? What they're not doing already? And actually, in terms of a conventional military, the Russian military is less formidable than before because they've had so many assets destroyed, so many howitzers, so many rocket launchers, so many tanks, armored personnel carriers, infantry fighting vehicles, some warplanes, some helicopters, a few ships, no submarines, as far as I know. But yes, the ground forces have been more than decimated. The Air Force and the Navy, not so badly. Putin's husbanded them shows that he actually is circumspect about that. He's completely incautious with the lives of his men, willing to fritter those away because you see people as being of no value. But anyway, so what can they threaten Ukraine with and the rest of the world? Putin was bragging that Oreshnik is very, very accurate, as extremely long range, and it can't be stopped by any missile defense system, and so on. But he wouldn't reveal the technical particulars. That's because they've rattled the nuclear sable so often, it just has no effect. I mean, I was frightened when the war began. I thought there's a small chance would he go nuclear even against Western countries. As I was living in London at the time, was, I'm going to be the nuclear fallout zone. But people have stopped believing that, and they keep changing their nuclear posture. They've done that 5 times in the last 3 years, and I can't think of a time when they did that previously in my lifetime. So they're just doing that for the sake of public relations. So he's been like the boy who cried wolf. So Nobody's paying any attention to that, so he's got to talk about something because nukes we think he definitely not going to use. Oreshnik he will use, and indeed he has used. But although yes, it's harmful to the Ukrainians, is not as terrifying as Putin likes to claim. And indeed, there was a press conference in the Russian Foreign Ministry, and Maria Zakharova, Putin's liar in chief, that woman who is the only person in the world to use more makeup than Donald Trump. There she was, a press conference, and then she took a phone call. Oh, just by chance. She's never ever taken a phone call or press conference before, and she just happened to put it on speakerphone. What an oversight. Well, careless mistake could happen to anybody, in which a male voice says, "Be sure not to mention the Oreshnik missile in this press conference." Okay, duh. So she's completely unsurprised. She's obviously the worst actress in the world. Now, why was she doing that? To really play up this. And some people, the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, think they're very sneaky, that they're incredibly clever just to slip that one out there. That obviously the foreign media are there and reporting that'll really put the frighteners on the collective West, the fascist, imperialist, whoever's who are backing the Kiev regime. But anyway, it really hasn't worked. These Oreshnik missiles, obviously, very pricey, and things are not going well for Russia. So carrying on with that, I mean, about 2% of their army has deserted. Now it's not that high. That we know may well be high. Ukrainians have significant problems with that as well. And then Zelensky, he just announced their death toll: 43,000 dead, 370,000 wounded in the war so far. Is that figure true? Well, it has the ring of truth to me. I don't actually know, because Russia's death toll thought to be at least 150,000, and it's wounded sort of the order of 500,000. So considering Ukraine's got a third of the population of Russia, less than. You'd expect its death toll to be a third, a bit less, perhaps. Roughly equal numbers of troops on the front line. Another thing is the Ukrainians are a little bit circumspect with the lives of their men because their population is lower. They've had minimal success recruiting foreigners. Russia has recruited a lot of foreigners, recruit people they think as disposable, indigenous ethnic minorities, and so on, and throwing them away in these meat attacks. So you'd think that Russia's death toll would be at least 3 times that of the Ukrainians. So that sort of figures. 43,000 is quite credible. You think they might be underreporting for propaganda reasons, but if they are underreporting, I don't think about that much. The one thing about the 370,000 wounded, you said that's surprising. How come 9 times more got wounded than got killed? 9 times. 3 times more wounded than killed is typical, but the same individual can show up several times. Be wounded, go to hospital, recover, back to the front, wounded again, back to hospital, recover, back to the front, wounded a third time. The same individual can show up several times. So it's not 370,000 individuals are wounded, 300 occasions. I mean, if there's some shrapnel on your chest and some on your leg, that's one wound, not two, methinks. So Zelensky, why is he doing this? They sometimes be quite candid about how difficult the situation is. Partly the Western allies know if you abandon them, they will collapse and face up to that. Do you want Russia to win this war? Do you want to be humiliated? Do you want Russia and your adversaries to be hugely emboldened? Do you want a hyper aggressive, genocidal tyrant to have more of the world's resources than before? You really don't. So therefore, you're going to have to put your money where your mouth is and really step up the aid, or that's going to happen. And Western countries, they can afford to do this to make up the shortfall. The United States pulling out the aid, but they're too parsimonious and purblind to do so. Anyway, thank you for watching my channel. Make sure you subscribe on Patreon. Donate PayPal, georgecallahan79@gmail.com. Goodbye.